When I first saw him standing in my bathroom, holding a bouquet of tulips and looking more embarrassed than surprised, something inside me snapped. Not in fear. Not even in anger. It was something raw, deeper, ancient, a pulse I hadn't felt in years. I was wearing my robe, barely tied, fresh out of the shower. Steam clung to the mirror and to my skin. He muttered something about the door being open, about confusing the numbers, about wanting to welcome me to the neighborhood. But the way he looked at me, not inappropriately, but with real, startled awareness, made my knees weak. I managed to laugh it off, told him to wait outside while I got dressed. My voice sounded too high, too casual. When the door clicked shut behind him, I stood there, frozen, my breath catching like it used to when I was much younger and far less forgotten. That evening, while my husband texted me from his hotel, asking if I remembered to water the plants, I stared at those tulips on the table. They didn't come with a card. But they didn't need one. Because 3 months ago, something began that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my boundaries, and myself. And if you've ever been drawn toward something you knew could destroy you, just for the chance to feel alive again, then maybe you'll understand. But first, tell me where you're watching this from, and be honest, have you ever kept a secret that almost swallowed you whole? I used to think I was content. That quiet mornings and habitual evenings were just part of growing older together. We had a routine, my husband and I, finely tuned over 8 years of cohabiting harmony. Or maybe stagnation. That's the word I never allowed myself to say aloud. He woke at 6. I brewed the coffee. He liked it black. I preferred tea but drank coffee because it made mornings feel shared. He kissed my cheek goodbye, keys always jingling in the same hand, always out the door by 6:45. The silence that followed was once a comfort. Now it echoed. The house was spotless. I made sure of that. Not because he asked me to, but because I needed control over something. The creak of the hallway floorboard, the hum of the dishwasher, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, those were the sounds of my days. I told myself I liked the peace. That I was lucky to have it. No raised voices, no drama. Just stability. Predictability. A man who came home every night, paid the bills, kissed me goodnight, and turned off his bedside lamp before I could even think of reaching for his hand. It wasn't a bad marriage. It just faded. Like an old photograph left in the sun too long. That morning, I noticed the moving truck across the street while trimming dead leaves off my potted fern. A man, mid-40s, tall, lean, dressed in jeans and a flannel that hung open over a white t-shirt, was unloading a bookshelf. I didn't recognize him. Not that I made a habit of spying on the neighbors. But this one was new. Definitely new. He moved with a relaxed kind of grace, effortless and unbothered. His dark hair was messy in a way that suggested intention, not neglect. And when he paused to take a sip from a water bottle, he caught me watching. He smiled. I instinctively stepped back, knocking over the watering can. Water splashed on my slippers, cold and unexpected. I cursed under my breath and shut the blinds, heart thudding with a strange and unwelcome beat. I didn't tell my husband about the new neighbor. There was no reason to. When he called that night, the conversation was the usual checklist. Did the repair guy come? Did I remember to schedule the dentist? Did I take the car in? Yes, yes, and yes. I wanted to tell him about the smile. About how it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. But what would I say? That a man carrying furniture made my heart race? Instead, I said I missed him. He said, me too, with the distracted tone of someone scanning a spreadsheet. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that smile. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but more like a jolt to the system. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, turning slightly left, then right. I adjusted the strap of my nightgown, noting the dip of my collarbone, the curve of my waist. Nothing had changed physically. But something internal had stirred. A kind of awareness. A flicker. The next day I avoided the front window, ashamed of how curious I felt. But while folding laundry near the upstairs landing, I caught a glimpse of him again. He was hammering something on his porch. Bare arms, sawdust clinging to his shirt. He looked up and saw me. Waved. I didn't wave back. I pretended I hadn't seen him. But my heart thudded against my ribs as if I had. Later, I baked a pie. Peach, his scent lingered like that in my mind, warm and sharp. I told myself it was for us. For my husband and me. A nice gesture. But I cut it into even slices, saved a few, and debated bringing one across the street. Just as a neighborly welcome. That's all. I didn't. That night, the tulips arrived. He knocked once. I opened the door in yoga pants and a sweater, unwashed hair tied up, expecting a delivery. Instead, there he was, holding out a bouquet. I had extras, he said. Figured you might like some. I stammered something, probably thank you, and he handed them to me with a small, almost embarrassed smile. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The flowers were pink and white. Slightly wilted at the edges, imperfect, which somehow made them feel more personal. I placed them in a vase, set them on the kitchen table, and stood staring at them long after the sun dipped below the rooftops. When my husband called, I told him the same things. That dinner was fine. That the car was running well. That I was tired. He asked if I was okay, something in my voice must have cracked. I said yes. I always said yes. But something had changed. Something small, barely perceptible. The kind of change you only recognize after it's too late. The next morning, I opened the bathroom door and found him standing there. Tulips in hand. I had left the door unlocked, a mistake, I told myself later. He was equally startled. Maybe more so. I'm sorry, I thought this was, I didn't mean. He backed out quickly, face flushed. I managed a laugh, light and breathless. It's fine, I said. Really? It's just unexpected. He nodded. Right. Sorry again. I'll just. The door closed. And I stood there, wet hair clinging to my neck, towel slipping, staring at the spot where he had stood. At the air that still held the warmth of something not quite real. Not yet. But soon. The day after he stood in my bathroom with those flowers, everything inside me felt unsettled. Like my skin didn't quite fit right, like the air had a weight it didn't have before. I kept replaying that moment, the confusion in his face, the way his voice stammered, the way I laughed it off like it was nothing when it was, in fact, not nothing at all. It was something. A flicker, a spark, something dangerously close to ignition. I went through the motions that morning. Coffee brewed, as always. 2 slices of toast browned evenly. I spread the butter slower than usual, watching it melt into the surface like time dissolving into something unrecognizable. I didn't taste the first bite. I barely noticed the second. The tulips were still on the table. A little drooped now, their stems starting to bend, petals curling inward. I thought about tossing them, but something stopped me. Instead, I trimmed the ends and added fresh water, as if that act could somehow rewind the moment they represented. Preserve it. Make it safe. I kept glancing at the window. Not deliberately, or so I told myself. My hands moved from surface to surface, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, adjusting the placement of coasters, fluffing the couch pillows as if someone might come in and judge the neatness of my home. Or maybe I just wanted to distract myself from the humming inside my chest. At some point, I saw him again. He was walking to his car, a grocery bag in one arm, keys in the other. He didn't look up this time. Didn't glance toward my window. And that stung more than I expected. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk. It wasn't part of my usual routine, but I needed to move. To breathe different air. I wore a sundress, casual but not careless, and pulled my hair into something loose. I didn't think much about it. Or maybe I thought too much and told myself I didn't. I passed his house slowly. The porch still had boxes stacked in the corner. One of them was open to books, mostly. A coffee mug on the step. It was warm, steam rising. He was home. I almost kept walking. But then I heard his voice behind me. "Hey," he said. "Perfect day for it." I turned. He was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame like he'd been there the whole time. Like he knew I'd pass. But he didn't say it that way. It was casual. Natural. Still, I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. "It is," I said, trying to sound breezy. "Just needed to stretch my legs." He nodded, stepping down from the porch. "Me too. Been unpacking since morning. Starting to forget how to stand straight." We laughed, awkwardly but not painfully. I adjusted the strap of my bag and said I was heading to the corner store. He said he needed milk. Of course he did. So we walked. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded, sure, with questions, possibilities, unspoken things, but not awkward. Just dense. At the store, we went separate ways. I wandered through aisles I didn't need, picked up a magazine I'd never read. He found the milk. When we both stood in line, we didn't speak, but our eyes met once. Briefly. Enough. On the walk back, he carried my small bag even though I insisted I could manage. It felt old-fashioned, oddly sweet. At my driveway, I reached for it, but he held it a second longer than necessary before handing it over. Our fingers brushed. It was just a touch. But it lingered. That night, my husband called. He sounded tired, distracted. "Long day," he said. "Meetings back to back." I told him about the walk. I didn't mention the neighbor. Not directly. Just said I bumped into someone new on the street. He said, "That's nice," like he meant it. Then we hung up. I stood in the kitchen afterward, hands resting on the counter, staring at the blackened reflection in the window. It looked like another woman looking back. One I wasn't sure I recognized. The next morning, I was watering the front lawn when he came out again. Shirtless this time, not intentionally, I'm sure. It was already hot, the sun climbing higher than usual for that early hour. He waved. I waved back. He crossed the street. Just like that. "Got any extra coffee?" he asked. It was a joke. Or at least meant as one. But I didn't laugh. "I do," I said. And I invited him in. My hands trembled when I poured the mugs. I tried to hide it by talking about weather, furniture, local stores. He didn't say much. Just listened. Sipped. His presence filled the room like incense, subtle but persistent. Familiar in a way that shouldn't have been possible. We sat at the table. The tulips between us. I saw his eyes move to them. "Still alive," he said. "Barely," I replied. The silence that followed stretched too long. I stood to put the mugs in the sink. That's when it happened. We kissed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even deliberate. One moment I was placing the mug down, and the next he was behind me, and I turned, too quickly, maybe, and our faces were close. And it just happened. The kiss was short. Nothing cinematic. But when it ended, I didn't move away immediately. Neither did he. Then, just like that, he stepped back. Apologized. Said he didn't mean to cross a line. I nodded, unsure what to say. My throat was tight. He left. I locked the door after him, leaned against it, and closed my eyes. That kiss wasn't about passion. It was about presence. About proof that I could still make someone pause. Still be chosen. Even in a fleeting, foolish moment. All afternoon, I couldn't focus. I rearranged the spice rack. Reorganized the linen closet. Folded and refolded the towels. My mind kept returning to the kiss. To the smell of him, a mix of soap, sweat, and something unplaceable. To the weight of his hand on my hip. Brief, but there. I wondered if he'd come back. I told myself I hoped he wouldn't. And I told myself that hoping that made me a good person. But I knew better. I didn't see him for 2 days. Maybe he was avoiding me. Or maybe I was avoiding myself. I kept to the back of the house, let the laundry pile up, and pretended to be busy with things that had no real urgency. Every sound from across the street made my stomach flutter, a door closing, footsteps on gravel, even the brief bark of his dog, which I'd only just realized he had. I told myself I was overreacting, that it had been nothing, just a moment, a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But the way my body responded whenever I thought of that kiss said otherwise. That kiss had disoriented something inside me. Not because it was forbidden, though it was. Not because it was wrong, though it absolutely was. It shook me because it felt so natural. So effortless. Like breathing. And for someone who'd been holding her breath for years, it was dizzying. I tried to normalize things. I went to the market. I even baked banana bread, which I hadn't done in years. It came out dense and slightly burnt, but I didn't care. I sliced it, plated it, and then, without thinking, I walked across the street with the plate in my hands. I stood at his door for almost a full minute before I knocked. The moment it opened, I almost turned around and ran. But I didn't. He looked surprised. Tired, too, like he hadn't been sleeping. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe, like me, he'd been lying in bed replaying everything over and over again. I held out the plate. I baked too much, I said. He took it with both hands, fingers brushing mine. Thanks, he said. That was all. There was no invitation inside. No conversation. No lingering stares. Just a quick nod and a quiet thank you. I walked back to my house feeling foolish and exposed. What did I expect? That we'd pick up where we left off? That we'd pretend it hadn't happened? That we'd acknowledge it, even silently? But silence was what I got. Back home, I filled the kettle and let the water boil until the shrill whistle filled the entire kitchen. I didn't even make tea. I just stood there, palms flat on the counter, eyes unfocused. My phone buzzed that evening. A message from my husband. A photo of his hotel room, bed neatly made, a takeout container on the desk, laptop open. The caption read, "Long day. Miss you." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The light coming through the window was soft, almost apologetic. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have, assessing my reflection like it belonged to someone else. My robe hung loosely off my shoulders. My hair was still a mess. But my face, my eyes, looked alive. More so than they had in months. Around mid-morning, I stepped out to tend the garden. It was mostly ritual, the flowers didn't need me, not really. But I needed them. The feel of soil, the sound of water, the distraction of pruning things into order. That was when I heard him behind me. Morning. I turned too fast, clippers still in hand. He was standing just at the edge of my driveway, hands in his pockets. Not smiling. Not frowning. Just there. Morning, I said, my voice a little too high. Thanks for the bread, he said. It was good. I nodded. I'm glad. He didn't leave. I didn't invite him closer. But we stood there, awkwardly connected by an invisible thread that neither of us wanted to pull too tightly. I've been meaning to fix the fence on the side of your house, he said after a moment. It's loose at the bottom. If it's okay, I could take a look at it later this week. I told him that would be fine. Thanked him. Tried to keep my tone casual. Then he added, I haven't forgotten. About what happened. My breath caught. I just didn't know what to do with it, he said. Neither did I replied. Another silence. I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable, he said. They already were, I said quietly. Before you ever walked into that bathroom. We didn't say anything after that. He nodded once, then walked back across the street. I turned back to the garden, but I didn't touch a single flower. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine. I rarely drank alone. But that night, the silence in the house was too loud. I sipped slowly, savoring the warmth that bloomed in my chest. I thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe, but realized I hadn't really talked to anyone in weeks. Not deeply. Not honestly. That's what struck me most. How lonely everything had become without my even noticing. It wasn't that my husband had changed. Or that I no longer loved him. It was that I no longer knew how to reach him. We had drifted without drama. Just a quiet widening of space between us that neither of us fought hard enough to close. That kiss hadn't caused the rift. It had just shown me where the cracks already were. I slept poorly again. My dreams were fractured, full of doors I couldn't open and voices I couldn't hear. I woke up feeling disoriented, as though I'd lived a different life while I slept. The next day passed slowly. I didn't see him. I didn't expect to. But just after dinner, a reheated bowl of soup I barely tasted, I heard a knock at the door. It was him. He looked unsure, like he might turn around at any moment. I know it's late, he said. But I thought maybe you'd want to talk. I didn't say anything. Just stepped aside to let him in. We sat at the table again, but this time there were no tulips between us. Just two people, unsure of what they were doing. He started to speak, then stopped. Ran his hand through his hair. Looked at me. I didn't come here for anything, he said. Not really. Just, I don't know. I felt like I owed you something. You don't owe me anything, I said. But I didn't mean it. Not completely. I didn't expect it to feel like that, he said quietly. That kiss. I nodded. Me neither. That was all we said. He stayed only a few minutes. We didn't touch. We didn't flirt. We didn't cross any lines. But when he left, I felt something had shifted again. Not in a reckless way. In a grounded way. Like acknowledging what had happened gave it less power. Or maybe more. I wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time in weeks, I felt less like I was unraveling, and more like I was waking up. The day unfolded like any other, or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. My hands moved through the usual morning rituals, making the bed, folding the throw blanket, wiping down already clean countertops, but none of it brought the usual sense of order. I felt restless. Like I was waiting for something, though I had no idea what. The tension I had tried to suppress since that quiet evening conversation at the table had returned, sharper than before. I didn't see him all morning. That should have made it easier to concentrate on normalcy. On quiet. But instead, I found myself glancing at the window again, listening for signs, the opening of a car door, the soft crunch of footsteps on the sidewalk, anything that might place him back in the space just beyond my reach. The silence had weight, and I carried it in my shoulders. In the afternoon, I decided to walk to the small local bookstore just a few blocks down. I hadn't been in a while, and I told myself it had nothing to do with avoiding my house or the thoughts that haunted its every corner. I browsed slowly, tracing the spines with absent fingers, pretending to care about titles I wouldn't read. At the register, the woman behind the counter greeted me like an old friend, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to her. I smiled politely and left without buying anything. Walking back, I took the long route, winding through side streets and familiar backyards. The air was warm, slightly humid, and my blouse clung to my back by the time I reached my street. My heart thumped louder as I turned the corner. His car was there. Parked in the same spot. Just like always. As if nothing had changed. As if everything hadn't. I slowed as I passed his house, half hoping he might be on the porch, but it was empty. The front door was shut, windows dark. I moved on, trying not to let disappointment settle too deeply. I had no right to expect anything. No reason to feel abandoned. And yet, the feeling rooted itself stubbornly beneath my ribs. At home, I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring again at the place where the tulips had stood. The vase was gone now. I'd put it away weeks ago, telling myself it was time to move forward. But even with the table cleared, I could still see the outline they had left, a ghostly imprint of a moment I couldn't erase. It was almost evening when I heard his voice. From the side yard. I hadn't even realized the window was open until the sound drifted in a low, casual, speaking to someone on the phone. His tone was light, a little amused. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm of his voice stirred something dormant. I sat still, listening longer than I should have, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Then the doorbell rang. It startled me enough that I almost dropped the glass. My heart leapt before I even got to my feet. I opened the door slowly, unsure of what I expected. It was him. "Hi," he said, more gently than I was prepared for. He held a small paper bag. "I picked up some pastries earlier. Figured I'd bring you one." I stepped aside, wordless. He entered, placed the bag on the counter, and stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with his hands. I offered him coffee, though it was late, and he accepted. We didn't talk much while I poured. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy, exactly, but it had layers. Like we were both navigating something delicate, something neither of us wanted to name. We sat across from each other again. This time without the excuse of flowers or apologies. Just 2 cups and a shared pastry we barely touched. I looked at him, trying to measure the lines on his face, the tiredness in his eyes. He looked like someone who had stopped pretending to be fine, and I recognized the reflection of that same weariness in myself. "I've been thinking a lot," I finally said. My voice was steady, but low. He nodded. "Me too." I hesitated. Then, not just about what happened, but about why. He didn't interrupt. Just waited. "I think I stopped noticing my life," I continued. "Somewhere along the way, it became a routine I performed without feeling. Like I was watching myself from the outside. I get that, he said after a moment. I've been there. Still am, maybe. I studied my hands, fingers curled around the warm mug. It's not that I wanted something else. I just forgot how to want anything at all. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settled when two people understand each other too well. I wasn't trying to start anything, he said. That day. In the kitchen. I know, I replied. He exhaled. But I'm not sorry it happened. Neither was I. But I didn't say it. Instead, I stood and took our cups to the sink. He remained seated, eyes on the table. The quiet stretched, but it felt different now. Not anticipation. Not confusion. Just acknowledgement. When I turned around, he was looking at me. Not with expectation. Not with desire. Just clarity. Do you want me to go? He asked. I didn't answer right away. I stepped closer instead, slowly, deliberately. My hand found the back of the chair, and I held it there, grounding myself. I think, I said carefully, that I need to remember who I am. Not as a wife. Or as a neighbor. But just, me. He stood then. Slowly. Respectfully. And nodded. Okay. There was no awkwardness in his departure. Just a quiet understanding. He left the bag on the counter. I didn't open it. After he was gone, I stood at the window and watched the last light of day slip behind the rooftops. The neighborhood was quiet. Familiar. But not the same. I felt changed. Not because of him. But because something inside me had been stirred back to life. Not lust. Not escape. Something simpler. The need to feel real again. To feel awake. That night, my husband called again. His voice was tired. I asked how his day went, and he told me. I listened. I asked questions. He seemed surprised by my engagement. I didn't force anything, but I didn't perform either. I spoke to him as myself. Not the role I'd been playing. After the call, I sat in the living room with the lights low. No distractions. No television. Just me and my thoughts. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel alone in them. I felt present. Uncomfortable, yes. Uncertain. But no longer asleep. Something had begun. And I wasn't sure where it would lead. The days that followed passed in a strange rhythm. They weren't heavy, but they weren't light either. It was like living between pauses, like something was holding its breath just beneath the surface. I didn't reach out to him. He didn't come by. But I could feel the echo of our last conversation in everything, the clink of silverware, the shift of the curtains, the way I stood in the kitchen without purpose, pretending to look for something on the counter when I was really just trying to feel the silence more clearly. I didn't tell anyone about him. Not my sister when she called, not the neighbor who always waved when she walked her dog, not even my husband during our brief checking calls, though he wouldn't have noticed the difference anyway. He spoke in outlines now. How's the weather? Did you get the mail? I'll be home late Thursday. There was no space for anything more. And maybe that was why I kept everything to myself. Because there was nowhere to put the truth. But the truth doesn't stay quiet forever. It started with a shift in the weather. A cooler breeze that hinted at fall. I opened the windows that morning, letting the air flow through the house. It stirred the curtains, brought life back into the rooms. I lit a candle, not because the scent mattered, but because it made the space feel more deliberate. Like I was choosing to be there, not just passing time. That afternoon, I saw him again. He was standing at his fence, looking down at something I couldn't see from the window. I watched him for longer than I should have, his posture relaxed, one hand resting on the wooden post, the other in his pocket. He looked like someone thinking too hard about something simple. Or maybe the other way around. When I finally stepped outside, I didn't expect to see him still there. But he hadn't moved. We didn't speak right away. He nodded when he saw me, a quiet, familiar gesture. Not invitation, not distance. Just recognition. I stood at the edge of my walkway, my arms crossed loosely in front of me. The distance between us felt loaded, like a page with too much white space. I fixed the fence, he said, his voice soft but clear. I looked at the wooden slats, now sturdy and even. Thank you. There was a pause. A real one. The kind that asks something without forming a question. I was wondering, he started, then stopped. I waited. I thought maybe we could go for a drive. Not far. Just get out for a bit. The suggestion caught me off guard. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even intimate. But it felt weighted, and part of me resisted immediately. The other part, the part that had been quiet for too long, leaned forward slightly, almost invisible, but there. I nodded. I need a few minutes, I said. Back inside, I didn't rush. I washed my hands even though they weren't dirty. I changed my blouse, added a small necklace, and pulled my hair back. Not with vanity, but with care. Like I was preparing to be visible. Like I was preparing to be seen. When I walked out to meet him, he opened the passenger door without a word. The drive started in silence. Not because we had nothing to say, but because sometimes silence is the safest place to start. We passed neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years. Schools, gas stations, a familiar coffee shop that had changed names but still had the same chipped sign. I found myself watching the way the light came through the windshield, the way the wind moved his shirt collar, the way my hands sat quietly in my lap like they didn't know what to do with themselves. We didn't go far. Just to a small park on the edge of the next town. It was nearly empty, a few people walking, a bench left in the shade. We sat there, side by side, not touching. Not speaking at first. And then I said it. We kissed. It came out flat, factual. Not as a confession. Not as a question. He nodded. We did. A breeze passed between us. Somewhere nearby, leaves rustled and fell. I haven't stopped thinking about it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Me neither. I turned toward him. He didn't look at me right away. His gaze stayed forward, out at the trees. I keep trying to tell myself it didn't matter, I continued. That it was small. Harmless. But it's not. Is it? He finally met my eyes. And in them, I saw all the things he wasn't saying. No, he said quietly. It's not. I looked down at my hands, twisting the edge of my sleeve. So what do we do with that? He didn't answer. Not right away. He reached for a pebble near his shoe and tossed it gently into the grass. The movement was slow, deliberate, like he needed something to do with his body while his mind sorted itself. I don't want to ruin anything, he said finally. Not for you. Not for me. I nodded. But something already feels different. Doesn't it? He looked at me again. Yes. The moment settled between us. Not heavy. Not light. Just real. On the way back, the silence was softer. Less uncertain. We stopped at a roadside fruit stand, bought apples we didn't need, and shared one in the car without talking about it. When he dropped me off, he didn't follow me to the door. He didn't lean forward. He didn't linger. He said, "I'm glad we talked." I said, "Me too." Then I walked inside. Later that evening, while folding laundry, I found one of my husband's sweaters in the bottom of the basket. I hadn't seen it in months, navy blue, worn at the cuffs. I held it in my hands for a long time, the fabric soft, carrying a scent that had become unfamiliar. I placed it neatly on the shelf, folded just right. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. My thoughts moved in quiet spirals. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't excited. I wasn't sure of anything. But I felt the weight of decisions not yet made pressing against the walls of my chest. Before I drifted to sleep, I remembered that moment in the park. The bench, the breeze, the unspoken truth sitting beside us. We kissed. Only once. But sometimes once is enough to rewrite the script. To remind you that you're still in the story. That the pages are still turning, even if you haven't held the pen in a while. I woke the next morning to a sky full of pale gray clouds and the subtle scent of approaching rain. The air through the window felt heavier than usual, like it was carrying a weight I couldn't name. The world was quiet, unusually so, and yet I felt everything moving faster inside me. The drive the day before had stirred something I wasn't ready to confront, and even sleep hadn't dulled its echo. My body went through the familiar motions, making the bed, brushing my hair, tying back the curtains, but my mind moved elsewhere, always circling back to the feeling of sitting next to him on that bench. How quiet it had been. How clear. I poured coffee I didn't want, drank half a cup without really tasting it, and stood in the middle of the kitchen trying to remember if I had anything to do that day. I didn't. There was nowhere I needed to be. No one expecting me. My husband wouldn't be home for 2 more days. That fact used to make me feel peaceful. Now it made the hours stretch long and undefined, like a hallway with no doors. By mid-morning, the clouds had turned darker. The rain came lightly at first, tapping against the window like it was asking permission to come in. I moved to the front room, sat in the armchair by the window, and watched the street blur behind sheets of drizzle. Across from me, his house looked dim and still. No lights on. No sound. I told myself he wasn't home. That it was better that way. Safer. Easier. But the ache in my chest didn't believe me. Around noon, I decided to clean the upstairs closet. It had nothing to do with actual need. The clutter inside had been sitting untouched for months, maybe years. But I needed distraction. Something to force my hands to stay busy while my thoughts unraveled. I found an old box of photo albums buried behind a stack of winter blankets. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and flipped through them without intention. Vacations, anniversaries, birthdays, all preserved in glossy rectangles. In one photo, my husband stood beside me on a beach, his arm around my waist. We were both younger. I wore a sundress that no longer fit. He was smiling at the camera. I was smiling at him. It made my stomach twist. When had we stopped looking at each other like that? Or had it been gradual, fading like a scent in an open room? I couldn't pinpoint a day, a moment. It just happened. One unnoticed breath after another. I closed the album. Back downstairs, I tried to settle myself. I made tea this time. Sat on the couch with a blanket over my legs. Read the same paragraph in a book 3 times without absorbing a single word. The clock ticked louder than usual. Every sound in the house felt exaggerated, even the creak of the floor when I shifted my weight. Then the knock came. Soft. Almost uncertain. I froze. My heart did that now familiar thing, leaping too quickly into my throat. I stood slowly, my fingers already curling around the edge of the blanket as if it might shield me from something. When I opened the door, he was standing there, rainwater on his shoulders, his hands in the pockets of a windbreaker that looked 2 sizes too big. His hair was damp, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said. I stepped back without answering, letting him in because my body moved faster than my judgment. He walked past me into the entryway, dripping slightly onto the tile. I closed the door behind him and felt the soft thud like a decision being sealed. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, he said, "I was going for a drive. Didn't know where I was headed. Ended up here." I nodded. "You want some tea?" I asked, even though it was already cold on the table. "Sure." We moved to the kitchen like it was routine. Like this was something we'd always done. I reheated the kettle while he stood by the window, watching the rain. "I couldn't concentrate today," he said. "Thought maybe talking would help." "Talking," I echoed. My voice felt far away from me. "That's what this is." He didn't answer. I handed him the tea when it was ready. We sat across from each other again, the table a familiar barrier. I looked down at my cup and watched the steam rise and disappear. Everything between us felt suspended, floating just above the surface of what could be spoken. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "Me neither. I keep thinking I'll wake up and it'll feel less confusing. That I'll stop wondering." He took a sip of tea, eyes still on me. "And does it?" "No." He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that sits in your chest and whispers all the questions you've been avoiding. "I tried to ignore it," he said. "I thought maybe if we kept our distance, if we didn't say anything more, it would fade." "But it hasn't," I said. "No," he said quietly. "It hasn't." We sat in silence again. The kind that didn't demand anything but still asked everything. "I keep thinking about crossing lines," I said. "About how easy it is to pretend something didn't happen, as long as we keep the shape of our lives the same. But something's already different. Isn't it?" "Yes," he said. The rain outside picked up, tapping harder against the windows. The wind moved the tree branches like restless fingers. I reached for my mug again, though I didn't drink from it. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. "Would it be easier," he said finally, "if we didn't see each other for a while?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe." We didn't move. Didn't shift. Just stayed there, cups in hand, the room holding its breath. Then it happened. We kissed. Not in hesitation this time. But in recognition. Of what had been felt, of what had been resisted, of what could no longer be undone. It was brief. Gentle. Quiet. And when it ended, neither of us said a word. He stood slowly, placed his cup in the sink, and walked toward the door. I followed, not rushing, not lingering. At the threshold, he paused. "We shouldn't," he said. "I know," I replied. But we already had. When the door closed behind him, the sound didn't startle me. It felt inevitable. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wood grain, listening to the rain, feeling the space he had left behind. Not just in the room, but in me. The day began like many others before it, quiet, ordinary, the sky neither threatening nor welcoming. I made my coffee the same way, 2 scoops of grounds, a dash of cinnamon, just enough to pretend I still enjoyed the ritual. The toast burned slightly at the edge, and I scraped it down with the back of a knife, watching the black flecks fall into the sink. I wasn't thinking about him, not consciously, but everything I did carried his shadow. The way I looked out the window before opening the blinds. The pause I took before walking past the front door. The small hesitation between each step. My husband was scheduled to return that evening. He'd texted late the night before, a short message that said he'd be home by 6. No emojis. No miss you. Just logistics, like a shipment being tracked. I spent the morning cleaning, an old habit, triggered by nervous energy I couldn't name. I wiped down surfaces that were already clean. I organized the pantry, refolded towels, straightened picture frames that hadn't moved. It wasn't about the house. It was about me. About trying to restore order where there was none. By early afternoon, I was exhausted but unsettled. My hands were still busy, but my thoughts had taken on a rhythm of their own. Every movement seemed to echo louder than necessary. The kitchen faucet dripping. The ticking wall clock. The occasional car passing by. I felt like I was waiting for something, even though I didn't know what. Around 3, the doorbell rang. My breath caught. It wasn't surprise. It was inevitability. My body already knew before my mind caught up. I moved slowly, deliberately, each step heavy with the knowledge of where this would lead. When I opened the door, he stood there, not hesitant, not bold, just present. His expression was unreadable, eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge something unspoken. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and stepped aside. He entered quietly, his movements careful, respectful of the space, of the silence. He didn't bring anything with him, no excuse, no offering, no reason. Just himself. We didn't go to the kitchen this time. I led him to the back room, the one we rarely used. It had a small sofa, faded throw pillows, and a low window that looked out over the garden. It always felt slightly detached from the rest of the house, and today that felt right. We sat at opposite ends. The space between us held everything we hadn't said. "I wasn't going to come," he said after a while. I told myself it was better to let it all settle. I said nothing. I watched the way the light caught in his hair, the way his hand rested on his knee. But then I thought, he continued, maybe this isn't something that needs to settle. Maybe it's something that needs to be understood. I folded my hands in my lap, my thumbs pressing against each other. "I've been trying to figure out what this is," I said, finally. "What it means. If it's just loneliness. Or timing. Or something else." "And?" he asked. "I don't know." We both looked toward the window then, toward the garden, though neither of us really saw it. It was just easier than looking at each other. "I think," I said slowly, "I've been pretending I'm still the same person I was 5 years ago. 10. That everything around me is the same. But it's not. I'm not. And I've been afraid to admit it because if I do, I have to admit I don't know what I want anymore." He nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. "I get it," he said. "I've felt that way too. Like I've been waiting for something to shake me out of the script I've been reading from." Silence settled again, soft and necessary. Then I said the words I hadn't planned to say. We spent the night together. They hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. He didn't flinch. Didn't look away. He nodded, once, slowly. "Yes," he said. Neither of us rushed to fill the space that followed. It was sacred in its own way. Honest. Unfiltered. "I thought I'd feel guilt," I said. "And maybe I will. But right now, what I feel most is clarity. About how much of my life I've been living in absence. Of touch. Of attention. Of meaning." He exhaled, a deep, tired breath. It wasn't about crossing a line. It was about remembering we're still alive. I looked at him then, really looked. And in his face, I didn't see temptation. I didn't see a mistake. I saw someone who had also been drowning in stillness and had finally come up for air. I don't know what comes next, I said. Neither do I. We sat there, two people caught between truths. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't reckless. It was raw. Eventually, he stood. I should go. I didn't stop him. He walked to the door, paused before opening it, and turned back. No matter what happens, he said, I'm glad it wasn't pretend. Then he left. I stayed in that room for a long time, staring out the window, the words still echoing in my chest. I didn't know how I would face my husband that evening. I didn't know what I would say. Or if I would say anything. But I knew one thing, the silence I'd been living in had finally been broken. And once it breaks, it doesn't return. I heard the garage door before I saw the headlights sweep across the front window. It was just past 6. I had changed clothes twice, settled on a soft gray sweater and jeans that made me feel neither dressed up nor too casual. Neutral. I didn't wear perfume. I hadn't lit any candles. I had set the table with 2 plates, even though I wasn't sure either of us would feel like eating. The lasagna in the oven was almost ready, its scent filling the kitchen, warm and comforting in a way that felt almost cruel. When the door opened and he stepped inside, he looked exactly the same. Same coat, same tired shoulders, same travel-worn eyes. He set his bag by the bench in the hallway and walked into the kitchen with a small smile. Smells good, he said, loosening his collar. I'm starving. I nodded, barely able to return the smile. My hands tightened around the dish towel I didn't realize I was still holding. He kissed my cheek on the way to the sink, absent-mindedly, like always. But his lips didn't touch skin. They hovered, ghost-like, a habit more than a gesture. I closed my eyes at the almost contact. We sat at the table like we always did. He asked about the house, the neighborhood, the weather. I answered in brief sentences, just enough to keep the shape of normal. The lasagna steamed between us. He helped himself to a second serving. I barely touched my food. The clock ticked behind us. I wondered if he noticed I hadn't asked about his trip. After dinner, he carried the plates to the sink and ran the water without being asked. I watched from across the room, trying to find the right moment, the right breath to begin. He dried his hands, turned, and leaned against the counter. You okay? The question was casual, but something in his eyes made it feel heavier. He looked at me like he knew there was something under the surface, something I hadn't yet said. I forced a smile. Just tired. He nodded, walking over, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. I didn't lean into it. I didn't pull away. I just sat there, still. That night, we lay in bed like we always had. His body turned slightly away from mine, one arm under the pillow, his breathing soft and steady. I lay on my back, eyes wide open, watching the ceiling like it might give me answers. I felt like a stranger in my own bed. Not because he was near, but because I wasn't sure if I belonged anymore. The next morning passed in polite silence. He left for errands. I cleaned the kitchen again, even though it didn't need it. I wiped down every surface, every handle, every inch of countertop. My body moved like it had been trained. My mind spun circles. Around noon, I went to the bedroom to change the sheets. It wasn't necessary, but I needed something to do. As I pulled the corners tight and smoothed the fabric, I saw it, a folded shirt of his on the nightstand, one I hadn't noticed before. I picked it up and brought it to my nose. It smelled like him, of course. But also like distance. Like a life I had been part of but hadn't fully lived in for years. I sat down on the edge of the bed and held the shirt in my lap. My chest tightened, not from guilt, but from realization. From the sudden, undeniable truth that I had built a life that had quietly stopped fitting me, and I hadn't noticed until someone else had looked at me like I was still here. That evening, while he read in the living room, I stepped outside onto the back patio. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the lawn. I stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, the wind catching my sweater just enough to make me feel exposed. Then, I heard footsteps. Not from inside. From the other side of the fence. He was there. Not by design. Just walking, maybe. Or maybe not. He saw me and stopped. We didn't speak. We didn't move toward each other. We just stood, separated by a line of wooden silence, looking at each other across a chasm we had created and crossed, over and over again, without ever really landing anywhere. I nodded once, the smallest of acknowledgments. He returned it, just barely. And then he walked on. I stood there long after he was gone. Later that night, my husband asked me if I wanted to watch something. A movie. A show. I said no. He didn't press. He went to bed before me, as he often did. I sat alone in the kitchen, the lights dimmed, the silence no longer comforting but charged. I pulled out my journal. I hadn't written in months. The pen felt foreign in my hand. I didn't write a confession. I didn't write a plan. I wrote the word now. Over and over. Now. Because that was all I had left. Not the past. Not the future. Just this one breath, this one moment, trying to reconcile the pieces of myself I had ignored for too long. And when I closed the journal, the pages felt heavier than before. As if they were holding something I could no longer carry alone. The house was quieter than usual, but not because of silence. It was the kind of quiet that came when everything felt heavy. Not loud. Just full. I moved through it cautiously, like someone trying not to disturb the balance of things. My husband was home now, present in the same way he'd always been, physically there, emotionally distant. We spoke when needed. We shared meals. We even laughed once, a shallow chuckle at something forgettable on television. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension growing, slow and invisible, like water behind a dam. I spent most of the morning in the garden. It was the only place that felt mine. The dirt didn't ask questions. The leaves didn't require explanations. I trimmed the overgrowth, pulled weeds that hadn't been touched in weeks, and watered each plant slowly, as if drawing out the time would delay the inevitable. My mind drifted more than I wanted it to. I kept replaying the last glance across the fence. The way his eyes met mine, then lowered without expectation. That mutual silence had been louder than anything we'd said before. There had been no need for words. He knew. I knew. And that knowing sat between us now, even when he wasn't near. By midday, the sun had crept out just enough to warm the back porch. I sat there with a glass of water, my hands damp from the hose, my clothes sticking to the small of my back. I looked out toward the edge of the property. The fence seemed taller today, though I knew it hadn't changed. What had changed was me. I could hear the soft hum of my husband's voice inside the house, talking on the phone. Business, probably. Logistics. Schedules. He used a different tone for those calls, more animated, more decisive. When he spoke to me, his sentences were shorter, softened around the edges, like he was trying not to wake something that had been sleeping too long. I stayed on the porch longer than I meant to, even after the sun shifted and the wood beneath my feet cooled. My glass had emptied long before, but I held onto it, letting the condensation wet my fingers. I kept thinking about how quickly everything had shifted. How a single moment could fracture an entire structure you'd spent years convincing yourself was stable. When I finally went inside, the house felt different. Not darker, but weighted. My husband was in the living room, watching a game with the volume low. He looked up when I entered, offered a faint smile, and returned his attention to the screen. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then I said it. I need to take a drive. He blinked, surprised, but didn't ask why. He only said, "You want me to come?" "No," I answered. "I just need a bit of time." He nodded and turned back to the television. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. The roads were familiar, lined with houses I'd passed hundreds of times without noticing. I turned down side streets I hadn't been on in years, letting instinct guide me. The motion helped. The silence inside the car felt different from the one in the house. More honest. At some point, I found myself near the lake on the edge of town. It wasn't planned, but it didn't surprise me. I parked near the overlook, where the water spread out wide and still beneath the hazy sky. A few other cars were scattered along the lot, but no one stood close. I stepped out and walked toward the railing. The breeze was light but constant, brushing strands of hair across my face. I let it. I stood there with both hands gripping the wood, staring out at the rippleless water, trying to remember the last time I had felt completely calm. I closed my eyes. For a long moment, I didn't think. I just stood there. And then, behind me, I heard a door close. I didn't need to turn around. He stood a few feet away. I could feel it. The same energy I'd felt every time he entered a room. Not loud. Not commanding. Just there. Solid. Present. I didn't speak. Neither did he. I felt him move closer, the sound of his shoes barely audible against the pavement. He stopped beside me, not touching, not pressing, just looking out at the same water. "I didn't follow you," he said quietly. "I just ended up here." "I know," I said. We stood like that for what felt like hours. Maybe minutes. The line between time and meaning had blurred too much lately. Finally, I turned my head slightly. I told him I needed to go for a drive. He nodded. "That's something." I looked down at my hands on the railing. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You don't have to." That answer brought tears to my eyes, though I didn't let them fall. "Not yet." "I feel like I'm betraying myself either way," I said. "If I stay. If I go. If I say nothing. If I say too much." "There's no easy version of this," he said. No. We didn't look at each other. We didn't need to. Everything we were was already laid bare in the silence. After a while, he asked, "What do you want right now?" I thought about it. Really thought. "I want to feel honest," I said. "For once. I want to stop performing. Then start there." I nodded, slowly. He stepped back. "You don't owe me anything. Not time. Not answers. I just want you to be okay." The simplicity of that broke something open in me. I turned my face toward the water again, letting the breeze dry the sting in my eyes. When I turned back, he was already walking away. I didn't stop him. I stayed at the lake until the sun had dipped low enough to color the water orange. When I drove home, the sky was dim, the town quiet, and the roads empty. When I opened the front door, my husband was at the kitchen table, reading. He looked up, eyes soft, tired. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I think so." He didn't ask where I went. I didn't tell him. That night, I stood at the sink and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. My face looked older than I remembered. Not from age. From weight. From silence. From knowing things I hadn't spoken aloud. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. We spent the night together. It was the truth. And it wasn't the only one. But it was the first one I had said out loud.